Started tonight as we welcome Shabbat, as we celebrate this big exciting weekend that lies ahead for Anna, who is like bursting with smiles. It's awesome. I wanted to invite the four of you to come on up to help lead us in lighting the Shabbat candles on page 4. So hopefully there's someone who can light a match. That is sometimes the biggest challenge. And then we will light the candles and welcome Shabbat together. Asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen. Amen. And so we can breathe in the light of Shabbat, allow that to enliven the Shabbat that is to come, and to hold some of that light and some of that joy with us all throughout the weekend. So you all can have a seat. I'm going to invite Anna to come right over here into the middle. And Anna is going to lead us in Shalom Aleichem on page 5. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Boachem L'Shalom, Shalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Baruch Hu L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Tzechem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thank you, Anna. You can have a seat. And with Shalom Aleichem, we welcome in the angels of Shabbat, and we pray that they will be with us in peace, bring blessing to us, we can offer blessing to them, and that as Shabbat ends, that they'll go out in peace as well. Until next Shabbat, when God willing, they will rejoin. And so we know that this weekend, we hope that you will, God willing, be able to welcome lots of angels into your midst, that everyone will stay well so that they can celebrate with you as everyone has been longing to do for some time. So we move into our Shabbat service on page 10 with Yedid Nefesh. Yedid Nefesh, Avarach Haman, Mishoch Avtach, Eritzonach, Yarutz Avtach, Kamo Ayal, Ishtachaveh, Mul Hatarach, Ki Ye'erav Lo, Yedidutach, Minofet Tzuf,
בכל טעם, הדור נאה זיו העולם, נפשי חולת אהבתך, אנא אלנה רפאנה לה, בהרות לה נועם זיווך, אז תתחזק ידיד רפה, והייתה לך שפחת עולם. ידה די 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 די, ידה די 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 די, ידה די 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 די, yada dai 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 dai, yada dai 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 dai, yada dai 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 dai, yada dai 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 dai, yada dai 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 dai, yada dai 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 dai.
We turn to page 14 as we move into the section of our service known as Kabbalat Shabbat, which literally means the receiving of Shabbat. That we, in this moment, are receiving Shabbat into our midst. That Shabbat is something that we need to somehow welcome or prepare for or open ourselves up to, and that we need to kind of be ready for it. So I'm just guessing that it might have been a little bit of a busy week for you guys, and there's some things on your mind and some details that you were working on. And so even more so, it's important to just take a minute, take a nice deep breath. Believe it or not, you've arrived in this moment. And it feels like a very long time ago that we assigned Anna her bat mitzvah date, because it was. And now here it is. And so there's so much anticipation that we had leading up to this particular Shabbat, that we welcome Shabbat every single week. And to really be able to pause and to appreciate this moment, that we've arrived here, that we get to not just celebrate Shabbat, but celebrate the simcha in your family's life. It's something very special. And the words of this prayer, Psalm 96, it's not really a prayer, it's a psalm that we sing as a prayer. At the red arrow say, Yismechu hashamayim v'tagel ha'aretz, that the heavens shall be glad and the earth rejoice, the sea and its fullness should roar. That there should be so much joy in the world that the earth itself is somehow celebrating. That it's not just the humans or the animals making noises on the earth, but the earth itself is celebrating. And so that's something to really, I don't know, I guess I think about that a little bit now this time of year in the springtime as everything is sort of bursting forth. It does sometimes feel like the earth is celebrating. And I love kind of just noticing all of the different colors and some of the different places on my regular drives and walks. And perhaps you have this experience as well. I was teaching a class actually from my desk the other day, and I was sitting in front of my window, and someone said, "Oh my goodness, look at that tree!" like behind me, which is one of my favorite things to watch it bloom each year. And so I hope that you have something like that you can appreciate in your regular routine to really kind of notice the way even the earth kind of bursts forth in joy. So if there's anything else that anyone would like to share, something that was particularly joyful this week that you're holding on to, I invite you to think about that for yourselves, if you want to share that aloud. But now's the time. The psalm is encouraging us to think about whatever those things might be. So I invite you to join with us at the red arrow in Hebrew or in the transliteration.
Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, v'tayeh Yismechu hashamayim, hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, v'tayeh haaretz. Yerim hayam, yerim hayam, yerim hayam umelu. Yerim hayam, yerim hayam, yerim hayam umelu.
Continue on page 16, 4 lines up in the Hebrew or in the transliteration with Psalm 97.
Or zarua la tzadik, o yishrei lev simcha. Or zarua la tzadik, o yishrei lev simcha. Or zarua la tzadik, o yishrei lev simcha. O yishrei lev simcha. O zarua la tzadik, o yishrei lev simcha. O yishrei lev simcha.
So hopefully we're feeling a little more settled into Shabbat as we turn to page 23, because it's now time to welcome the Sabbath bride into our service, into our palace in time that we're creating together, the Shabbat space. And I'll invite Anna to come on back up to help lead us in Lecha Dodi on page 23. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad, Hishmiranu el hamilchad, Adonai echad u'shmo echad, L'shem u'tiferet v'litila. Lecha, lecha, dodi, lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, Ki mekor habracha, merosh mikedem v'sucha, sof ma'aseh b'machshavat tefila. Lecha, lecha, dodi, dodi, lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Mikdash melech yirmelecha, Kumitzeini tocha hafecha, Rav l'shevet be'emek habacha, V'hu yachamo alay yechem la. Lecha, lecha, dodi, dodi, lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. We turn to page 25 and continue with the second verse on that page. Yamin usmo tifrotzi, Ve'et Adonai ta'aritzi, Al yadish ben partzi, V'nismecha v'nagila. Lecha, lecha, dodi, dodi, lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. We rise and face the door to symbolically welcome the Sabbath Queen.
Boi v'shalom ateret ba'ala, gam b'simcha u'b'tzola, tov emunei am segula, boi chala, boi chala. Lecha, lecha, dodi, dodi, lecha, dodi, likrat kala. Pnei Shabbat nekabela, lecha dodi likrat kala. Pnei Shabbat nekabela.
You may be seated. This evening, our Sabbath Queen came in the form of a preschool student. You never really know how she's going to show up, but today it was a, not yet kindergartner, which is very sweet. You can see it if you'd like. We continue now on page 27 with a psalm for Shabbat.
מזמור של יום השבת, עבוד על אדוני, רוצה משך, יולך יברוך ולך צדיק אתה מה יפרח, כארץ בלבנון יזכה שתולים בבית אדוני בחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו עוד ינובון בסבע דשנים ורעננים יהיו להגיד ישר אדוני צורי צורי ולא עלותיו פה.
So we are now getting ready to move into our evening service, into our Mari service on page 39. So hopefully we're feeling warmed up. Hopefully we're feeling ready for Shabbat by this time so that we could move into this part of our service. Please rise if you're comfortable and able to do so. Should we open this?
Or should we just count for people on the live stream?
And also Marcy in the other room.
Yes.
Okay, good.
More fun.
Glad we had that chat. Baruch Adonai Hamborach Leolam Va'ed. You may be seated.
ומעביר יום ולילה, ועוד יום ולילה, אדוני צבאות שמלכי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו ללמד ברכת אדוני, המרי ורבים.
Continue on the top of page 40. Ahavat Olam, with timeless love you have loved your people, the house of Israel.
אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכבנו ובקומנו, נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו לאורך ימינו, לאורך ימינו, ובהם נגע יומם ולילה, יומם ולילה. ולך עזזים ממנו לעולמים ברכת אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל.
page 41, and I invite Anna to come on back up as she will lead us in the words of Shema and V'ahavta.
Shema
Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
V'ahavta Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayu ha'devarim ha'ela asher Anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shitecha b'beitecha u'lechtecha b'derech u'v'shoftecha u'gnunecha u'kshartam liot al yadecha v'hayu totafot b'yaminecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'b'yisharecha.
Continue silently on page 42.
Adonai Elohechem emet.
Continue on page 44.
ומלכות הברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ומרים בני ישראל לחנו שירה בשמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות ספר מלכותך רובנך בקיים לפני משה זלר ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כיבד אדוני את יעקב וגולם יד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גא ישראל.
We turn to the page 45 for Hashkivenu, which is our prayer of peace and protection that we recite every evening, as even our rabbis recognize that nighttime can be a scary time. And whether you're afraid of the dark, or whether it's a time that can feel a little lonely for whatever reason, especially in a world where maybe we didn't understand as much about science, and we just pray that the sun will come back and the day will start anew. But we also recognize in our own time that there are plenty of people in this world, plenty of places that are in need of this ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha that's talked about in this prayer, that we implore God to spread over us your canopy of peace, to restore us with your good counsel, and to save us for the sake of your name, to shield us. And so as we sing these words, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha this evening, I invite you to take a moment, and if there is a person or a place that is in need of a little bit of extra protection, a little bit of extra healing, a little bit of extra compassion in this moment, to send your prayers out to them. If you want to hold the names of folks who you might be thinking about in need of healing, you can feel free to do that. And we especially send our prayers to those who are living through the war in Ukraine and all of those who are suffering both in our country and around the world.
Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha ufros aleinu Shalom aleinu v'yokol Israel, Ya Yerushalayim.
We turn to page 46, and I invite Anna to come back to the bima to lead us in Vishamru.
Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam b'rit olam B'nei Yisrael Oti li'olam Oti li'olam Oti li'olam Vishamru Israel et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam b'rit olam Ki shevet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim v'et ha'eretz Vishamru b'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam b'rit olam Uvyom ha-Shabbat Shabbat v'yinafash Shabbat v'yinafash Shabbat v'yinafash Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam b'rit olam.
Continue with Chatzi Kaddish.
Yitkadav yitkadash meraba
Amen.
B'yama divrei kirate v'yamlich machute
B'chayechonu v'yomechon Uv'chayedechol Beit Yisrael
Bagala uvizman hariv v'maru
Amen.
Yehi shmei rabba mevorach
Ya'olam u'yamei amaya Yitbarach.
Yitbarach v'yetabach v'yepa'ar v'yirama v'yetnaseh v'yetadar v'yetalev v'yetala shmei kudasha
Brichu.
Le'olam min kol birchata v'shirata tu
Shechata v'nechamata Damiran be'alma.
v'yimaru
Amen. We turn to page 47 for our Amidah, which is silent in the evening. And so I invite you to rise if you're comfortable and able to do so, and to begin on page 47 and continue through to page 52. And I invite you to feel free to move through the words in Hebrew or in English, or to allow this to be a moment where you can acknowledge the prayers in your own hearts.
Yaseh shalom imromav, Uyaseh shalom aleinu, V'yakol Yisrael, V'imru, amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, V'yakol Yisrael, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, V'yakol Yisrael. 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 V'imru, amen.
You may be seated, and we continue with Kaddish Shalem on page 54.
יגדל ויגדל שמי רבה, בימה דברכם, בימה מחמתתי, בחיי כל בימה חנו, חיי תכל בישראל, בגדלם זמן קריבים רו, אמן, יהי שמי רבה מברך, ויעלם ליומי המיה יתברך. יתברך כפי ישתבח, כפי יתברך ותברך ונעשה, ותדבר ותלה ותלה, שמי לקודשה, בריחו ליאלם וכל ברכתו ושירת, תדוש בחדו ונחמת אדם ירם יאמר ויאמרו. Amen. Take up its Lord, Hon, to call Israel, Kodam, Hon, Vishmai, Vimro. Amen. Yehi Shalom Rav, Vishmai, Vachaim, Elena, Vil, call Israel, Vimro. Amen. Osei Shalom, Roma, Vayasei Shalom, Vil, call Israel, call Israel, Val, Vimro. Amen.
So before we move on with our prayers in our service, I wanted to take a moment to talk about our Torah portion, which Anna knows a little something about. So in this week's Parsha and more, we know, and we're learning a little bit more, that Moses, Aaron, and Aaron's sons had a really big job, you could say. And we know that they were charged with leading the entire Israelite people out of slavery in Egypt, and then on to create a new governing system and an entirely new way of worship. And they also had to maintain the holiness of the community and the connection between them and God. And that's what we spend a lot of time learning about and talking about, especially as we move through this book of Leviticus. Up until now, we have learned in Torah a lot about what these guys have been charged to do. And I say guys in particular, it was men who were charged to do these things, and many details about the various sacrifices that the people were told to bring for a lot of different purposes. But in this week's Parsha, we learn a little bit more about what Aaron and the priests may have looked like. Okay? So we all have the image, perhaps, if we've seen the Ten Commandments, of like Moses and now like if we think about Moses, now we picture that. It's sort of like seeing Harry Potter before we read the books. Like now all we see is Daniel Radcliffe. So we all have that image. But before we dive into our text, I want to ask you, if you spend any time thinking about this, and if not, then we'll think about it right now. How might you imagine Aaron and his sons to have looked? Hollywood aside. What are some physical characteristics? How big were they? What do you think they might have looked like? Anything in particular come to mind?
Scrawny, hairy.
Okay, hairy, they were Jews. Maybe kind of scrawny, maybe nevishy, Let's put all the stereotypes that we can think of there. But right, I mean, so they were.
So that's why I'm thinking.
Right, so they probably weren't as well nourished, especially they were just slaves in Egypt. I mean, so let's think about this. It wasn't that long ago that they were freed. They were slaves in Egypt, although they did have to work very hard. So they may be somewhat muscular, because they might not be totally sitting around doing nothing all day. But I'd say this all the time to my kids. Like, you have to have the calories to make the muscle, and if they didn't have the calories, then their muscles are only going to get so big. So they may have been somewhat muscular, even though they may have been somewhat trim. Okay. So somewhat trim, possibly hairy. What else we have? Anything else? Maybe they were short. It's true. It's funny to think about. We can sometimes see sort of like renditions or go into like old ruins sometimes, and the doorways are really low, and we can learn that At other points in time, people didn't get as tall as they do today. I don't know what my excuse is, but that was maybe a thing at one point. So maybe these were shorter people. I would have felt at home.
Yeah, I'm not picturing blondes or red hair.
Good. So probably a lot of brown hair, a lot of dark curly hair. So you would have felt at home, Becca. Yeah. So yeah, maybe not. So and you have to wonder, especially at a time where there was a lot more of kind of people marrying people close to them. There probably was less diversity in that way. So was there blonde hair? Was there red hair? Good questions. But there probably were sort of less, less variety in those distinguishing features if we're all kind of marrying our cousins. That's a different time. We got a lot of laws about that too in Leviticus, who it's okay to marry and who it's not. Okay, so we have some ideas of maybe what these folks might have looked like. And we could also think about, as we read all of this, does it even matter? Okay? We read all about what they have to do. Does it even matter what they look like? So perhaps the more accurate question to ask as we move into this parsha isn't necessarily what do they look like, but what don't they look like? So in Leviticus 21:16, the text says, Diber el Aharon lemor, ish mizaracha l'dorotam asher yihiyeh bo mum, lo yikrav lahakriv lechem Elohav. Speak to Aaron and say, no man of your offspring throughout the ages who has a mum, a defect, shall be qualified to offer the food of his God. The text goes on to list some specifics about what this might mean. So it's unclear whether this is really meant to be an exhaustive list, but it certainly does cover a lot of ground of what these people might have looked like. The text goes on to say that, with this idea of a mum includes the following. Ki kol ish asher bo mum lo yikrav ish iver o piseach o harum o sarua. No one at all who has a defect shall be qualified. No man who is blind or lame or has a limb too short or too long. O ish asher yehiyevo shever regel o shever yad. No man who has a broken leg or a broken arm. O giben odak o tivalul be'eno o gara o yalefet o maroach shecha. Or one who is a hunchback or a dwarf, or who has a growth in his eye, or who has a boil scar, or one who has scurvy. So there's a lot of weird things that are kind of listed here of things that maybe a person shouldn't have if they're going to be tasked with the job of offering these offerings to God. It's a rather curious list, if you ask me. Some of these terms do appear elsewhere in Tanakh, and even often appear in pairs, as Tanakh likes to do, such as the pairing that we had near the beginning of the list of blind and lame. They often come together. While other words, such as the word translated as short-limbed, it only appears here. It is like a curious thing that happens in Torah where sometimes a word only appears once, and so we don't have a lot of context for it. It's called a hapax legomenon. It's a fabulous thing that we can like wonder about. And the translation of this word is then sort of obtained by what appears around it. Since we have this other word that means long-limbed, we then think that maybe this one means short-limbed. There's like a pairing and a juxtaposition. Otherwise, we don't really know what it means. Personally, I am always rather fascinated and disturbed at the same time by this list of physical characteristics that would be the reason to disqualify a priest from service. The text does not say, should a priest be mean to his neighbors, or should he be a vengeful person, that he wouldn't be fit to serve the community. Maybe those things are okay? Unclear. It does not say anything about how well he performs his job. We get a lot of instructions about what they should do, but it doesn't necessarily say anything about how well he performs his job as that being a determining factor as to whether he would be granted the right to continue in this very important role for the people. And it doesn't seem that there's any kind of test. There's no priest license that's given at that they have to kind of jump through a bunch of hoops in order to be able to do this, to become certified, nor is there any mandatory continuing education. They just, instead, have the ability to function as a priest based solely on, first and foremost, their lineage, being born into the priestly lineage. There's some rules about who you can marry and things about her that would disqualify the priest. But then we get to this list of physical characteristics that would deem this priest unqualified. So why should it matter what the priest looks like? As long as he's doing the job that he's supposed to be doing. We have a lot of instructions about what to do, how to do it, when to do it. What does it matter what he looks like? Unless, maybe part of the concern is that the way that he looks could get in the way of the job. So maybe there's a worry that this is a really important job, and maybe certain characteristics would mean that you can't properly perform that job. So, maybe if you needed to see things in a particular way and you were blind, it would be difficult to perform those tasks. Okay, maybe. But I'm not quite sure if every descriptor on that list would really fall into that category, so I don't quite buy that. My teacher, our teacher, Dr. Tamar Kamyankowski, points out that most of the conditions mentioned are ones that manifest externally. This suggests, she writes, that the concern is with the idealized perfect body and not with good health. In this case, the ideal body is male, without any visible divergence from the norm. Limbs, she say, must be in proper proportion to one another and fully functional. The back must be erect, the face must contain properly functioning eyes, and facial features must fall within normal parameters. The female body in this case is inconsequential since, as I said, women were not able to function in this role, so there's no talk of them. And so we're really focusing on the men. Sarah Melcher teaches that the blemished body is depicted as something that threatens holy status. The blemished body is disruptive to the entire system. And thus, she writes, must be brought under the restriction and under the control of the priests. In other words, it might not be that the condition itself is somehow going to impair the priest from being able to do the task at hand, whatever their job is, but rather that these physical abnormalities that they might possess might somehow distract the people or maybe distract God, and would thus, as a result, get in the way of being able to accomplish the task set before them to create and maintain holiness among the people. So encountering this text in our time, I don't know about you, raises all sorts of alarms for me. And I hope that you are currently as uncomfortable as I am with this entire section of Torah. After all, at least for me, I hope that we don't necessarily think of people in this way anymore. I'm sure that we all know ways in which people with disabilities and varied characteristics, be they externally obvious as some of the ones mentioned here, or internally present, that we know that they can still be accomplished in their fields. Folks can still be loving and caring human beings, and they can even be folks who we ought to strive to emulate in so many ways. And yet, as Shulamit Reinhardt points out, this text seems to state that physical imperfection somehow impairs holiness. While the priest's bodily perfection may no longer be a Jewish necessity, the idea and expectation of bodily perfection, she writes, have become a cultural goal of the wider American Jewish population, with terrible consequences, in this case particularly for women, regardless of age. And just as bad, Rabbi Bradley Artson reminds us that this passage, this little section of Torah, and others that are like it, have unfortunately lent biblical weight to the dehumanization of the disabled community, something that we have been striving to undo for so long and still have a lot of work to do. So then what do we do with this piece of text that we have in Torah that we encounter every year? So one of our friends and colleagues, Rabbi Alex Weissman, points out that the rabbis in the Talmud tells a story about a divine voice that chastised two mountains, Mount Carmel and Mount Tabor, because these two mountains were seeking judgment of Mount Sinai. The voice warns the mountains, you are all blemished in comparison with Sinai. I mean, it's Mount Sinai, important things happen there. What we learn from this, he teaches, is that when we compare ourselves to an impossible ideal like Sinai, be it a mountain or a body, we'll discover that we're all blemished. Our bodies, impermanent and vulnerable, will inevitably break and bend, he says. While some of us may be considered fit to step behind the veil, which is something that all of these folks were not permitted to do, while we might find ourselves able to do that today, could be that we might not be fit tomorrow. Illness, injury, aging, chosen body modifications, whatever the reason might be, the clay that is our bodies does not keep its shape. It cracks, it sags, it reforms, and it shatters. Of course, now that we no longer have a temple in Jerusalem, nor do we adhere to the sacrificial system at all, we could say that none of this is really relevant in our day and we can move on. Or we can look to the text and we can draw some of our own conclusions. Though the Torah text was very focused on physical characteristics, Rabbi Ashi does go on in this piece of the Talmud that's talking about these mountains. Rabbi Ashi does go on to say, if a man is arrogant, he is blemished. That even if his physical characteristics would have qualified him to perform the duties of a priest, that his arrogance would deem him unfit for holy service. So I guess should there ever be another time where a temple is rebuilt, gives us a lot to think about as who would be fit to serve in that temple and in what capacity. While there may continue to be loads of pressures in our world today to look a certain way, to act a certain way, and we may even be made to sometimes feel badly about ourselves if we don't conform to some ideal that has been set forth by society or that gets sort of put out there in front of us all the time by the media. I pray that rather than judging one another solely based on our outward appearance, that we might instead see each person for who they are on the inside. That may we judge one another not by our physical characteristics or personal possessions, but instead by the way that we treat one another, by the example that we set for others, by being a mensch every chance we get, and by trying each day to make the world a little bit of a better place than we found it. So, Shabbat Shalom. Our text can be challenging sometimes. And I say to B'nai Mitzvah students all the time, you don't have to agree with everything, but to find a peace and to wrestle with it, that's the goal that we have to do every year when we encounter these texts again.
You brought up my favorite word.
Apex Lagavana?
Apex Lagavana. So I think the most famous example of a Apex Lagavana is every year, second day of Rosh Hashanah, when we read the binding of Isaac, the Akedah is what we call it in Hebrew. The verb Ya'akod is a Apex Lagavana. It's the only time that verb ever appears in the entire Tanakh.
They're really fun. Yeah, I mean, there's entire worlds that live in each one to try to really know what's happening there.
Yeah, that's when Akkadian and Ugaritic come in real useful.
And that's when Tamar gets really excited. I just saw that she went into her third graders class, I think, to teach them a little Akkadian. As you do, as a parent. So we will continue with our service on page 55, and I'd love to invite Anna to come lead us in Kiddush.
Yes, it's grape juice.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'achava u'v'ratzon hinchilanu zikaro lema'aseh bereshit ki hu yom tefillah v'mikra'ei kodesh zecher l'yetziat Mitzrayim kivanu b'charta v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'amim v'shabbat kodshecha v'ahava u'ratzon hinchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai mikadesh hashabbat.
Amen.
No.
It's bourbon. we continue now with the counting of the Omer. So we are currently in a period of time where we're counting the days from the second Seder, from Pesach all the way to Shavuot. So we're marking time from the liberation from Egypt all the way to the revelation that we will have at that most fantastically awesome Mount Sinai that we already talked about. And so we count each day. And yesterday was day 27. And so the blessing and the preamble are on page 63, and then we'll flip to the bottom of page 67 so that we can count today's day.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher qidsanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat ha'omer.
Amen. Hayom
Shmona v'esrim yom shehem arba'a shavuot la'omer.
Today is 28 days, 4 weeks of the Omer. So we're a little over halfway through our counting. And this week we find ourselves in the week of Netzach, and each time we come to Shabbat, we are finishing out that week, about to start a new one. And Netzach is kind of a way of understanding eternity, sort of time and eternity, and this sort of, I guess, awesome, unending way that might be. And the day that we're in is Malchut, and Malchut is the kind of emanation of God that we have kind of closest to us in our world. The way that we might experience the natural world around us, or kind of, see God in each of the beings, that we encounter in our lives. We're all sort of clothed in different things, but we all have that spark of holiness inside of us. And so today is Malchut of Netzach. It's this intersection of this eternal time and this very sort of here and now way of understanding Malchut and majesty. And David Ebenbach writes that rulers come and rulers go, and amidst all the tumult that we have in our world, what endures are values and our principles. And so, there's a lot of things that are eternal, and God willing, it is the sort of just action and our values that we pass on from one generation to the next that will kind of stand the test of time. So we continue on page 56, and I invite you to rise if you're comfortable and able to do so for Aleinu.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, lateit gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kikoye haratzot, velo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chalkenu kahem, v'gor aleinu kecho hamonam, v'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad.
You may be seated. We continue on page 58 with Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish. And this week in our community, we observe the yard site of Fanny Bloom, Mark Einhorn, Sidney Greenspan, Jeffrey Licht, Jean Lowenstein, Jacob Rabinowitz, Hannah Rubin, Rose Strauss, Nathan Weinstock, Edward Crane, Esther Gold, David Ingber, Rose Lieberman, Gerald Martin, Maxine Rosen, Israel Shore, Benjamin Weinberg, and Eleanor Labrie. There are other names of someone for whom you might be saying Kaddish or observing a yard site that you wish to share with the community. I invite you to do so. And I invite those who are reciting Kaddish to please rise, along with all those for whom it might be your custom to rise in support of the mourners or for those who have no one to say Kaddish for them. Yitzgadal, Yitzkadash, Shemei Rabbah, V'alma divra kirute v'almich malchute. V'chaye chon v'yome chon v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael. V'agala u'bizman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba v'barach li'olam v'lamei amaya. Yitbarach v'yit shabach v'yit ha'ar v'yit romam v'yit naseh. V'yit adar v'yit haleh v'yit halal shemei t'kudusha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata ta'amiran v'yalma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom v'romav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates peace on high bring peace to us, to all Israel, and to all who dwell on earth, and we say together, amen. Well, tomorrow morning at 9:30, we will see you again, as we'll be very excited to call Anna to the Bima once again, as she becomes bat mitzvah. And so whether you're joining us in person or for those of you on live stream, we hope to see you then. And there are a number of things coming up in our Bcbj calendar. Unfortunately, I think the things that are in our pamphlet on Sunday might be full. There's a Jewish Philly walking tour at 2 p.m. and a men's club dinner at 6 p.m. But we have our board and annual meeting on May 19th. And all are invited to come to that. And I don't think it's live streamed, so I think that's an in-person experience. And then there is the last days of Hebrew school are upon us. It is hard to believe. So they're coming up in the next week or so. So it has been a year. And we made it to the end, and I believe things were learned and fun was had. And so I guess that's all we can really hope for, with or without masks, in person or online. God willing, it was a happy experience, and all of us are healthy. So we will close out our service on page 75 with a blessing for one another. The priestly blessing is something that many families have the tradition of offering to their children every Friday night. And so feel free to put your arms around one another and completely embarrass your children, or just send some love and hugs and warm affection if they are far from you or don't want to come that close to you in this moment. And we will bless them with these ancient words. May God bless you and protect you. May God's face give light to you and show you favor. May God's face be lifted toward you and bestow upon you peace. May it be God's will. Amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbos.
Thanks.